All right, let's jump right into this deep dive on the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index. Now, if you're gearing up for exams, you know that understanding poverty beyond just income is absolutely critical. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the latest report for India, zeroing in on the key concepts, the data, and the trends you really need to know. So let's start with a really basic question that gets to the very heart of why the MPI even exists. For ages, we pretty much measured poverty by how much money someone makes. But is that really the whole story? I mean, think about it. Does having just enough money to not be poor automatically mean you have access to good healthcare, or a solid education, or even clean fuel to cook with? The global MPI says no way and challenges that whole idea. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to decode the index itself. Then we'll zoom in on India's national poverty snapshot and break down what's actually driving that poverty. After that, we'll explore the huge differences between states and then track India's incredible progress over the years. And we'll wrap it all up with a rapid-fire revision session covering everything you need for your exams. Okay, let's get into our first section. We need to really understand what the MPI is and how it's put together. Grasping this framework is the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. So the MPI is an index of acute, multidimensional poverty. Now, the keywords there are multidimensional and acute. The whole point is to look past just the bank account to capture the real-life struggles that overlap and hit people all at once. It's about seeing poverty in all its different shapes and sizes, which, by the way, is the very first Sustainable Development Goal. The index is built on these three core pillars, and you've got to remember, they're all weighted equally. Each one makes up a third of the index. Now, for your exams, here's a super simple mnemonic to lock this in. Just think help the poor. That's H for health, E for education, and L for living standards. Simple, right? And if we zoom in a bit, within those three dimensions are these 10 specific indicators. Whether a family is considered poor or not depends on how many of these specific deprivations they're facing. And notice how real-world these are. We're not talking about abstract economic theories. We're talking about tangible stuff like, do you have a clean toilet? Do you have safe drinking water? Has a child in the family tragically died? This is the reality the MPI captures. And here it is, the formula that exam setters absolutely love. The MPI is simply H times A. H is for headcount, or incidence. That just tells us how many people are poor. A is for intensity. That tells us how poor those people are on average. And that's the genius of it, you see. It doesn't just capture the width of poverty, but also the depth. Okay, with that framework locked in, let's get to the good stuff. Let's apply this to India and see what the data from the most recent national survey tells us. This is the headline figure, the one you absolutely have to remember, 16.4%. So what does that mean? It means roughly 1 in every 6 people in India is considered multidimensionally poor. This is our H, the headcount, the incidence. It's the starting point for everything that follows. Now, this table breaks down that national average, and wow, the first thing that just jumps out is that massive urban-rural divide. Just look at the incidence, their IH. It's 21.2% in rural areas, but only 5.5% in urban areas. That means the poverty rate in rural India is nearly 4 times higher than in the cities. That's a huge policy challenge right there. And this chart illustrates a really key idea perfectly. When you compare the MPI headcount of 16.4% to the usual monetary poverty lines, you see they're telling different stories. Multidimensional poverty and money-based poverty aren't the same thing. They capture different, though often overlapping problems. Someone might be just above the income line, but still be deprived of basic sanitation or education for their kids. Okay, so we've looked at H, how many people are poor. Now let's dig into the A in the formula, the intensity. This is all about understanding the nature of poverty in India. What are the specific things, the specific deprivations, that are contributing the most to that final MPI score? This chart gives us a feel for just how poor the poor are. And it shows that the vast majority, that big 61% slice, are deprived in about 1/3 of the indicators. This means they've just barely crossed that poverty line. But there's also a smaller but really significant group that's facing much deeper poverty, dealing with deprivations across half the indicators or even more. Now, this is a super high-yield slide for your exams because it pinpoints the biggest drivers of India's MPI value. Nationally, the #1 contributor is a lack of clean cooking fuel. That's followed closely by housing and sanitation. Nutrition and years of schooling are also major factors. These are the pressure points where smart policies can make the biggest and fastest difference. So that national average of 16.4% is useful, but honestly, it hides a massive story underneath. It completely masks the huge differences between India's states. So let's dig into that subnational data and see this tale of two Indias for ourselves. And this table just lays it out bare. On one end of the spectrum, you've got Bihar, where the MPI is 0.154 and more than a third of the population is multidimensionally poor. And then at the complete other end, you have Kerala, with an MPI of just 0.003 and a poverty rate that's less than 1%. The difference is just staggering. Putting these two states side by side like this creates a really powerful and easy to remember contrast. The poverty rate in Bihar is almost 38 times higher than in Kerala. It just goes to show you the deep development gap that exists within the country. A snapshot in time is one thing, but the real story, the exciting part, is often in the trend. So let's add that crucial dimension of time and see how India's poverty landscape has actually transformed over the 15-year period from 2005 all the way to 2021. And wow, this timeline tells an absolutely incredible story of progress. India's MPI value has just plummeted from 0.283 down to 0.069 in only 15 years. This is a massive achievement, and it represents a real improvement in the lives of millions and millions of people. All right, we're in the home stretch. Let's get to our final section, the exam key takeaways. Think of this as your rapid-fire revision. We're going to consolidate the most important concepts and figures that you need to have locked and loaded. First things first, you have to master these core concepts, the MPI formula, H times A. The three dimensions, remember, are mnemonic: help the poor. The poverty cutoff, you're poor if you're deprived in at least 1/3 of the weighted indicators. And remember the term censored headcount. Don't let the name scare you. It's simple. It just means we're looking at the percentage of the entire population who are both poor and deprived in one specific thing, like cooking fuel. Next up, the numbers. These are the headline figures you just have to have at your fingertips. The national MPI of 0.069. The national poverty rate, or incidence, of 16.4%. The average intensity of 42%. And of course, that big gap between the rural MPI of 0.089 and the urban MPI of just 0.023. And finally, remember the big patterns. That stark contrast between the poorest state, Bihar, and the least poor, Kerala. The incredible overall trend of poverty falling since 2005. And critically, know the main drivers of poverty in India, which are all centered on basic living standards and nutrition. So what's the big takeaway here? The crucial point isn't just the data, but the story it tells. And that story is that India's progress has been, frankly, remarkable. But it's also a very uneven story. The data forces us to ask tough questions. How do we make sure this progress reaches everyone? The big challenge now is to design policies that are targeted to the specific deprivations in specific places, whether that's cooking fuel in one state or nutrition in another, to make sure the poorest regions don't get left behind. And that, right there, is the next chapter in India's development story. Thanks for joining this explainer.